Look, we joke about Microsoft licensing being a Rubik's Cube with missing stickers, but Dataverse isn't just that headache. Subscribe to the M365 Show newsletter now, because when the next rename hits, you'll want fixes, not a slide deck. Here's the real story. Dataverse unlocks richer Power Platform scenarios that make Copilot and automation actually practical. Some features do hinge on extra licensing. We'll flag those and I'll drop Microsoft's own docs in the description so you can double-check the fine print. Bottom line, Dataverse makes your solution sturdier than duct tape, but it brings costs and skills you need to face upfront. We'll be blunt about the skills and the migration headaches so you don't get surprised. And that starts with the obvious question everyone asks. Why not just keep it in a list? What even is Dataverse and why isn't it just another list? So let's clear up the confusion right away. Dataverse is not just another list. It's built as a database layer for the Power Platform, not a prettier SharePoint table. Sure, lists give you an easy, no license required place to start, but Dataverse steps in when easy starts collapsing under real-world demands. Here's why it actually matters. Lists handle simple tables, columns, basic permissions, maybe a lookup or two if you're lucky. Dataverse takes that same idea and adds muscle. Think. Proper relationships between tables, not duct tape lookups. Role-based security, down to record and field level. Auditing and history tracking baked right in. Integration endpoints and APIs ready for automation. That's why I call it SharePoint that hit the gym. It's not flexing for show, it actually builds the structure to handle business-grade workloads. But let's be fair, lists feel fantastic the day you start. They're fast, simple, and solve the nightmare of Project Final V7, XLX on a shared drive. If your team just needs a tracker or a prototype, they work beautifully. That's why people keep reaching for them. Convenience wins until it doesn't. I've watched this play out. Someone built a small project tracker in a list. Simple at first, then it snowballed. Extra columns, multiple lookups, half the org piling on. Flows started breaking, permissions turned messy, and the whole thing became a fight just to stay online. At that point, Dataverse didn't look like overkill anymore. It looked like the life raft. And that right there is the pivot. Lists hit limits when you try to bolt on complexity. Larger view thresholds, too many lookups, or data models that demand relationships. It doesn't take long before things wobble. Microsoft even has docs explaining these constraints, and I'd link those in the description if you want the exact numbers. For now, just understand, lists scale only so far, and Dataverse is designed for everything beyond that line. The shorthand is this: lists equals convenience, Dataverse equals structural integrity. One is the quick patch, the other is the framework. Neither is better across the board. It comes down to fit. So how do you know which way to go? Here's a simple gut check. 1. Will your data need relationships across different objects? Yes, lean Dataverse. No, list could be fine. 2. Do you need record level or field level security or auditing that stands up to compliance? Yes, Dataverse. No, list. 3. Is this something designed to scale or run a business critical process long term? Yes, Dataverse. No, list probably gets you there. That's it. No flowcharts, just 3 questions. Keep in mind that Dataverse brings licensing and governance overhead. Lists keep you quick and light. You don't pick one forever, you pick based on scope and durability. Bottom line, both tools have a place. Lists cover prototypes and lightweight needs. Dataverse underpins apps that must handle scale, control, and governance. Get that match wrong and you either drown in duct tape or overspend on armor you didn't need. And this is where it gets interesting because neither choice is flawless. Both have wins, both bring pain, and SQL still sits in the background like the grumpy uncle nobody can retire. That's where we head next. The good, the bad, and the ugly of stacking lists against Dataverse. The good, the bad, and the ugly of lists versus Dataverse. Let's be honest, none of these tools are perfect, and each will betray you if you put it in the wrong role. Lists, Dataverse, SQL, they all have their moments, they all have their limits, and they all have their specific ways of nuking your weekend. The real pain doesn't come from the tools themselves. It comes from picking the wrong one, then acting shocked when it falls apart. So here's the practical version of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Instead of dragging this out with a dating analogy and a food analogy, let's just call it what it is. 3 tools, 3 trade-offs. Lists are fast, low cost, and anyone in your org who can open Excel can learn to use one. They're perfect for quick fixes or lightweight projects, and they spare you extra license drama. But scale them up with multiple related lists or heavy lookups and you're duct taping duct tape. Your tracker quickly mutates into a swamp of random errors and warning dialogues no one can explain. Dataverse is structured and secure. It gives you real data relationships, role-based access, and features tuned for Power Platform apps. It's the reliable backbone when compliance, auditing, or long-term apps are involved. The catch? It comes with licensing twists and storage costs that pile up fast. I won't pretend to list exact tiers here. Check the official Microsoft docs linked in the description if you need numbers. But the point is simple. Dataverse is powerful, but it carries an ongoing bill, both in dollars and skills. SQL is legendary. It's got power, flexibility, and the longest resume in the room. But most makers can't touch it without a crash course in dark arts like permissions, indexing, and joins. For citizen developers, SQL is basically a locked door with a "you must be this tall to write" sign. If your team doesn't already have a DBA in their corner, it's not where your Power Platform app should live. Each of these fails for a different reason. Lists fail when they get overloaded. Suddenly you're fighting view thresholds, broken lookups, and flows that stall out of nowhere. Dataverse fails when you underestimate the cost. It looks included at first. Then you trigger the premium side of licensing and find out your budget was imaginary. SQL fails when you throw non-technical staff into it. It becomes an instant graveyard of half-finished apps no one can manage. So how do you decide? A simple ground rule. If you're feeding a production app that multiple teams depend on, lean toward Dataverse unless your IT group has good reasons to keep SQL at the center. If it's genuinely small or disposable, lists handle it fine. And if you're staring at an old SQL server in someone's closet, understand that it may be reliable, but it's also not where Microsoft is building the future. The key is clarity up front. Map which tool belongs to which kind of project before anyone starts building. Otherwise, you're not just choosing a tool. You're scheduling your own emergency tickets for 6 months from now. Trust me, there's nothing fun about explaining to your manager why the project tracker just stopped working because someone added one lookup too many. Here's the bottom line. Lists win for lightweight and short-term needs. Dataverse shines for scalable, governed apps with security and automation at the core. SQL is still hanging around out of necessity, but for many orgs, it's more habit than strategy. Get the match wrong, the cost hits you in wasted hours, failed apps, or invoices you didn't plan for. And speaking of cost, that's where we go next, because once you admit Dataverse might be the right choice, the real question isn't about features anymore, it's about what the bill looks like. Next up, how much will this actually cost in time and money? The cost. Nobody puts in the demo slide. Here's the thing nobody shows you in a slick demo. The real cost doesn't stop at it runs and a smiling screenshot. The marketing slides love telling you what Dataverse can do. They conveniently forget the part where you realize halfway through rollout that Microsoft charges for more than just buttons and tables. That gap between demo land and production reality, that's where teams get burned. Think of it like this. You budget for a bicycle, then Microsoft hands you not only the bike but also a helmet, gloves, reflective gear, and a bill for a maintenance plan you didn't ask for. Licensing feels the same. It isn't that Dataverse is a ripoff, it's that there are layers most people don't count for until the invoice hits. Expect licensing and storage to be the two knobs that turn your monthly bill higher. If you're serious about adopting it, budget for capacity and premium features early instead of scrambling later. Makers often assume Dataverse is free because it shows up bundled in some trial or baked into their tenant. That's the trap. Trials are temporary, and not every license covers production use. Don't assume those trial checkboxes equal long-term rights. Validate your licenses with procurement before you migrate a single workload. If you miss that step, you'll find yourself explaining to leadership why your shiny new enterprise app now needs a premium plan. Pro tip, include a licensing checklist in your planning doc. Better yet, grab the one we'll link in the description or newsletter. It'll save you from guessing. Here's a quick budgeting checklist you should actually run before rollout. 1. Estimate how much storage and number of records your app will use, not just day 1 but 6 months in. 2. Identify which premium connectors or features your app actually requires. Those are often the hidden multipliers. 3. Budget for a skills ramp, because even if you have the licenses, someone still needs to know how to design the schema and set up governance. That's it. 3 steps that keep you out of the licensing quicksand. Miss them, and you're the person adding random storage add-ons like impulse buys at checkout. It's a little like Candy Crush. You think it's just one more booster until you look at the credit card statement. But money's not the only cost. Time adds up just as fast, and it's a lot harder to measure or justify on a spreadsheet. Lists let people wing it. You spin them up, toss in some columns, and move on. Dataverse isn't that forgiving. It expects you to treat it like a system, not a sticky note. That means schemas, roles, solution layers, and governance to plan in advance. The best shorthand? Treat Dataverse as a project. Plan schema, roles, and governance upfront. Thinking you'll figure it out along the way is how you bury hours in redesign and rework. Here's the hidden trade-off. Dataverse bills you early, you pay licensing, you pay effort, you pay training. It feels heavier on day 1. Lists look free at first, but the debt comes due later. Patches, rebuilds, broken flows, and IT firefighting every quarter. Skip Dataverse and you may save cash now but burn hundreds of staff hours quietly in the background. Pay early or pay often. Not buying Dataverse often means inventing clunky workarounds. Need record-level security? You try bending SharePoint groups into shape. Need an audit trail? You glue flows together to dump logs into Excel. Need something to scale? You start splitting a large list into child lists with cross-references. None of those moves are free. They cost in time and complexity. Clever hacks age poorly, and eventually someone has to pay the maintenance bill. Seen another way, Dataverse front-loads its pain. You spend money and effort up front. Lists backload their pain. You spend nothing today, but you leak time for years. That wasted time is support tickets, late nights, and compliance headaches. Which bill you'd rather pay depends on how serious the app is supposed to be. So here's the blunt rule. Don't treat Dataverse like a hobby project. Budget for it like you would any infrastructure, because that's exactly what it is. Treating it as a side feature hidden inside M365 just sets you up for nasty surprises later. And remember, even if the budget gets approved, money alone won't save you. Costs are predictable. The real speed bump is skills. That's where most teams stall, because Dataverse doesn't just ask for dollars, it asks for a different level of know-how. And that gap hits fast when makers assume it's just lists with better branding. Makers beware. Skills you actually need. Here's where most makers hit a wall. Dataverse isn't forgiving if you jump in, assuming it works like the tools you already know. This section is about skills, the real ones you actually need before you drop production data into it. If lists let you wing it, Dataverse expects you to show up with a plan. The first rude awakening is data modeling. In lists, you throw in a column or add a quick lookup and it feels fine. Dataverse makes you face relational design, how tables link, how data should be normalized, and how to prevent duplication. Build it wrong, and you don't just annoy people with small errors, you end up with broken apps, weird results, and performance crawling to a stop. Security is the other early gotcha. Dataverse uses role-based access, and you can't just map SharePoint groups and hope it all works. You'll need to think about table-level permissions, and when it's required, record-level access. Expect to design roles carefully and actually test them, because it's far too easy to let the wrong people touch data they shouldn't. That's not a scare tactic. It's just what happens when makers assume everyone in the team means safe defaults. Performance follows right behind. In lists, you're used to hitting view thresholds and filtering workarounds. With Dataverse, the limits show up differently. They come from sloppy structure, heavy duplication, or relationships that don't make sense. If you don't design with scale in mind, you'll feel the lag fast. A simple fix? Test your app under load with a pilot group before announcing you're live. Staged rollouts are cheaper than fixing a meltdown in production. Now about Copilot. Yes, it can provide suggestions. It'll nudge you toward column types or even help scaffold a schema. That's a convenience, but it's not a substitute for design. Copilot doesn't understand your business rules, and it won't know why finance data shouldn't link the way marketing wants it to. Treat it like a helper in the room, not the architect of the house. I'd even recommend checking Microsoft's Copilot guidance for makers, the docs linked in the description if you want the official roadmap on what it can and can't do. Here's the stripped-down skills checklist you actually want in your toolbox before shipping real Dataverse apps. Learn the basics of relational data modeling, understand security roles, pick up some Power FX so you can handle business logic without hacks, and figure out how to test performance under real load. Those 4 skills are the difference between building an app your IT department shakes their head at or one they actually support long-term. And yes, the Tesla analogy applies. Dataverse feels like being handed the keys to a powerful system you don't quite know how to drive. Lists are the tricycle you've been wobbling around on. Getting into Dataverse blind is how you end up in a ditch. If you're handed the keys, schedule a short training session before you move anything to production. It's not about being an expert overnight. It's about avoiding mistakes that are painful to undo. The upside here is big. The skills you need aren't walls, they're stepping stones. Once makers learn to structure tables, scope permissions properly, and keep performance in check, the apps they build stop being throwaway prototypes. They start looking like proper solutions that can scale, survive audits, and integrate cleanly into the rest of the platform. That's where a maker begins to overlap with the work of pro devs and architects. That's also where IT stops rolling their eyes every time they see another Power App request. Think of it this way. Without these skills, you're babysitting fragile workflows, trying to unstick broken permissions and chasing bug tickets you can't explain. With them, you're building things that stand up for months or years without your constant hand-holding. That's not just an upgrade in tech, it's an upgrade for how your team sees you. So if makers want to cross the gap, it comes down to one decision: put in the upfront training or accept being stuck patching holes in production forever. The training path pays off every time. But even with the skills in place, there's still one more challenge you can't avoid. What happens when you decide to move that heavily used list into Dataverse? That jump isn't neat or automatic, and it's where the real chaos often begins. Migration reality check. You've probably got at least one list like this, a creaky old table that's been patched, extended, and duct taped for years, but somehow still holds the weight of your team. Then leadership pipes up with, let's shift it into Dataverse. It sounds fine in theory. In practice, it's more like redoing the wiring in a house while the lights are still on. Nothing catches fire immediately, but you feel the risk in your bones. Here's the expectation reset. Migrations are never a magic one-click job, no matter how tidy Microsoft marketing makes it look. Yes, official migration tools exist, but you don't hit migrate on Friday and relax Monday morning. Every list has hidden baggage, calculated columns, funky views, flows that wrap around themselves like spaghetti. Those quirks that lived happily in SharePoint don't translate neatly when Dataverse takes over. For instance, in many migrations, we've seen entire workflows collapsed because they leaned on SharePoint list IDs that don't align cleanly with Dataverse record identifiers. The data moved, but the flows keeled over. Same goes for security. Lists rely on SharePoint site security. Dataverse runs on role-based models. That's not a straight swap. A designer who had edit access in SharePoint might suddenly see far more or nothing at all until you rebuild the roles sensibly. If you need specifics here, check Microsoft's own migration documentation. We'll drop that in the description. Migration often feels like pulling a block from the base of a Jenga tower. Maybe the structure wobbles, maybe it topples. Don't lean on luck. This is where planning keeps you out of disaster. Here's a simple migration checklist worth running before you even touch the tool. 1. Inventory what's inside the list, columns, lookups, power automate flows, dependencies. 2. Trim the junk data now. Old projects and duplicate junk eat expensive Dataverse storage if you carry them over. 3. Map your fields and start designing equivalent security roles in Dataverse. Don't assume it all ports over. 4. Rebuild or test flows against Dataverse IDs to be sure they behave. 5. Pilot with a small group of users and always have a rollback plan. That's the skeleton plan. Each step bites into time up front, but it saves rework later. The sneaky cost isn't just time, it's data gravity. SharePoint lists trick people into hoarding. A folder full of ancient projects? Still there. Columns no one's touched since 2017? Still there. Migration forces a choice. Either haul all that dead weight into Dataverse and pay for extra storage or finally clean house. Most smart teams use migration as the excuse to scrub their data and cut clutter before moving. And that's the real opportunity. Migration can be a blessing if you treat it like a remodel instead of a forklift job. Half-broken flows become rebuilt and maintainable. Permissions hacked together with site groups get redesigned into proper roles. Sketchy calculated columns morph into clear business rules. Instead of dragging your mess forward, you rebuild a foundation in Dataverse that can actually handle tomorrow's workloads. But let's not pretend it's painless. Migration feels a lot closer to re-architecture than to copy-paste. If you run it like a file copy, you'll spend weeks fixing fallout. If you treat it like re-architecture, you give your team a chance to land with something stronger than before. The short pain beats long-term chaos. So, the take-home is this: respect migration. Budget time for cleanup, test cycles, security reviews, and user pilots. Skip those steps and the mess follows you. Approached right, you come out with structured data that's easier to govern, ready for automation, and a much stronger fit for AI. When the data is modeled properly, Copilot and other automation actually start behaving like useful partners instead of throwing random guesses. And that brings us to the bigger picture, because ignoring Dataverse or dodging the migration pain might feel like saving yourself effort in the short term, but it usually just guarantees a worse problem hiding around the corner. Avoiding Dataverse is like skipping the dentist. You think you've dodged the drill, but what you're really doing is booking yourself a root canal later. Here's the recap worth remembering. 1. When speed matters and the scope is small, stick with lists. 2. For real relationships, security, and scale, use Dataverse. 3. Treat migration like re-architecture, budget for skills, licensing, and cleanup. Subscribe to M365 Show for blunt fixes and grab the migration checklist at M365 Show. It'll save you tickets later. Start with a pilot, scope your data, and talk to procurement before you move anything. And here's the engagement question. What's the one list you dread migrating? Drop it in the comments. We might pick one for a breakdown.